Good evening and welcome to the Redwood Library in Athenæum in Newport, Rhode Island. My name is Benedict Lecca, Executive Director, and we are thrilled to welcome back Dr. Edward Markward for his Music Appreciation Series tonight. The lecture this evening is American Composers, Part 7, Some Neo-Romantics, Howard Hanson, Ernest, Bloch, Roy Harris, Paul Creston, and Samuel Barber. As always, this program is generally sponsored by the Jarzembek family, Mark Jarzembek and Michelle Drum. And we want to thank them very much for allowing us to put this on. And we want to, of course, thank Dr. Markward, and here he is now. Welcome, Dr. Markward, and welcome to everyone this evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Benedict, and welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to talk about some neo-romantic composers, new romantic composers. The connection to Brahms, Schumann, and those guys is quite palpable. There is a contemporary sort of flavor with all of these composers, but yet they will stick with tonality for the most part. And if I give you the tenets of what these neo-romantic composers felt or thought about music, I think it will be helpful. I also would point out that these guys that we're going to listen to tonight are composers that I sort of grew up with when I was in college, high school and college, playing the music of these gentlemen. The tenets are these. Music not only aims at a direct, effective connection with a non-specialist audience, but connects with it. And as many of you know, I'm sure, the so-called avant-garde music, or the extension of the German tradition with Arnold Schoenberg and Alban Berg and so on, never really caught on with at least the American public. And their music sort of disappeared from the concert stage. And neo-romanticism relies on the tonal organization of large-scale musical structures. Just like any other composer who was a bona fide romantic in the 19th century, these guys wrote operas, symphonies, string quartets, all kinds of chamber music, and so on. The first person we're going to talk about is Ernest Bloch, who was born in 1880 in Switzerland, in Geneva. He moved to America and he ultimately passed away in 1959 in Portland, Oregon. The reason I include him is because most of his famous works were written here in the United States. Grove's Dictionary of Music and Musicians, for example, appropriately cites him as an American composer and teacher of Swiss origin. Between 1899 and 1903, he lived and worked in Germany and began his lifelong confrontation with the issues of spirituality and religion, namely his Jewish faith, and how that heritage could best be put on a stage with concert music or artistic purpose. After spending a year in Paris, he returned to Geneva in 1904. And then in the early years of the First World War, he wrote his first important Jewish-related works, Trois Poèmes Juifs in 1913, Israel for 5 solo voices and orchestra, and probably his most famous instrumental work, the Shlomo, a Hebrew Rhapsody for cello and orchestra. Shlomo is Hebrew for Solomon. He moved to the United States in 1916 and finished the Shlomo here in the US. He was initially brought to this country, or came to this country, to teach and conduct at the Mannes College of Music, Theory, Composition, and Conducting. Later, he became the first director of the Cleveland Institute of Music, and in 1925, he became the first director of the San Francisco Conservatory. Let us give a listen to the Shlomo for cello and orchestra by Ernest Bloch. I think you can tell that it's rather chant-based, and we will find several of our composers use chant, either the Hebrew faith or Christian faith, to as a building block for their music. In the 1920s, Bloch continued to solidify a perception of himself as a, quote, Jewish composer, end quote, whose art was inspired by and infused with an idea of a Hebrew spirit of Jewish antiquity, and trying to figure out how he goes about being this Jewish composer and creating art music for symphony orchestras, quartets, and so on. His next great work, and probably his most famous work, is the Avodat HaKodesh, or the Sacred Service, of 1930 to 1933. He became one of the most celebrated composers of his time, and this became one of the most enduring works of his. It was a watershed undertaking and a major contribution both to the Jewish liturgical expression and to the genre of sacred music, i.e., the oratorio. It was equally appropriate expression in the context of worship and in the concert hall. To Bloch, music was a spiritual experience, and I think we can compare him to J.S. Bach in that light, meaning that everything he wrote was inspired by God. The depth of Bloch's impact on American music following him, due to his teaching posts not only in those places I mentioned, but at the University of California at Berkeley, is on his students, chief among them Roger Sessions, Quincy Porter, Bernard Rogers, George Antile, and Randall Thompson, of all people. The Sacred Service embodies the confluence of high art and Jewish sacred music. It speaks to Jews engrossed in the act of prayer, to general audiences of any faith or religious orientation, or none. It can be taken just solely as a piece of abstract music as well. It's divided into 6 portions. It's for baritone, speaker, chorus, large chorus, and large orchestra. The first movement is Ma Tovu, meditation. How goodly are thy dwellings is the text. How goodly are thy dwellings, O Jacob, thy dwellings, O Israel. Through thy great mercy, O God, I came to thy house and bowed down in thy holy temple. Here is the first movement, the meditation from the Sacred Service. A slight diversion, if I may. One of the composers we'll be talking about in the months to come. I have a session on Rhode Island composers. Among them is Richard Cumming. And Richard Cumming, or Didi as we knew him, who was the composer in residence at Trinity Repertory Theater for 23 years, studied with Mr. Bloch in San Francisco, and pointed out to Mr. Bloch that he heard some things in the Sacred Service which Bloch earlier composed in the Shlomo, to which Mr. Bloch responded, I only steal from the best. To me, it's reminiscent of the opening of the Brahms German Redwood. I think, as I often do with music, whether it has text, a program, or is abstract, in the hands of great composers, even if we don't know what the baritone was singing about or the chorus when it entered, sometimes music can move one, and it gives credence to the old saw that music begins where the words leave off and can say so much more or even enhance the words, which I think is Bloch's uh, way of going here, is to help us really gain an appreciation for the text and the feeling above all of the music. Here's a little bit of the last or the fifth movement, Va'anachnu, and this is the adoration. We bow the head in reverence and worship the King of Kings. Note that it starts out based on chant, very similarly to the very first movement. As you can tell, it's very, very tonal, which will be to some extent true of all of the composers we're going to talk about this evening. I'd like to next move to Howard Hanson, which is a name that I think those of you in the attending tonight who are of a certain age, or if you're a musician, probably grew up playing the music of Howard Hanson and Paul Creston and Samuel Barber. Howard Hanson was born in 1896 in Wahoo, Nebraska. And Benedict asked earlier who comes from Nebraska. Well, in addition to Howard Hanson, Johnny Carson and Marlon Brando came from Nebraska. And from 1924 on, he became the director of the Eastman School of Music. And that's very, very important, and founded the Eastman Rochester Orchestra. It became very important to all of us because on every program that he did, he either programmed his own music or that of other young upcoming American composers. Of course, Koussevitzky in Boston did that with the likes of Aaron Copland, Francis Poulenc, Maurice Ravel. Howard Hanson did it for the American composer, and I think that's truly important. He was a declared neo-romantic, is how he referred to himself. And his music is tuneful and vigorous, and remember the sentence that we started with, it is accessible. And I think that's very, very important. In 1925, he initiated the American Composers Concerts, and many of the compositions were performed there at his Eastman Rochester Philharmonic. He also offered up these pieces to guest conductors of his own orchestra and asked guest conductors if they would also perform music by American composers. Probably his most famous piece has the title peculiarly called the Romantic Symphony. It's his subtitle. It's number 2, and here is a bit of the first movement. Vigorous rhythms. And so on. I misspoke. It's actually the third movement of that symphony. His first symphony, if you're interested, much along the same lines as the Romantic Symphony, is called the Nordic Symphony, and it's in E minor, opus 21. He also wrote an opera called Merrymount. It's based on a fairy tale. And what I would like to play for you now from the Merrymount Suite is the children's dance. He, shortly after writing the opera, decided that maybe he could get more play, and i.e. probably make a few more shekels, if he made a suite out of the tuneful music that's found in the opera. So this is the children's chorus from Merrymount Suite. And I think you can hear right away that there's a little bit of a seed of nya-na-nya-na-nya-nya. The one note missing. Typically, American composers of this time period, say from the 20s to the 50s or 60s, owned this kind of cross rhythm and rhythm that came from jazz, really. Syncopation. All based on nyana, nyana, nyana. He instituted a Festival of American Music in 1930, and this festival ran till 1971. And amazingly, more than 200 compositions by American composers had been given their first performance, with the composers being present at both the rehearsals and the performances. The world held Howard Hanson in very high esteem indeed. The honors that came his way are many. A striking one that just bogged, I had to look at it about 3 times. He received 34 honorary doctorates during his lifetime. That's a lot. Next composer is Roy Harris, known as the Cowboy Composer. He was born in 1898 in Oklahoma City, and died in Santa Monica, California. He also was not only a composer, but a teacher. And the composers that we talk about tonight, except one, that being Samuel Barber, all had college affiliations and all made the bulk of their income from teaching positions. Like Aaron Copland, Roy Harris is sort of representative of what we think of as the open spaces of America. Remember Copland and Billy the Kid, Rodeo, and although Appalachian Spring has the same sort of feeling, that was East Coast. Roy Harris's works are marked by these broad tonal melodies. And I often think how patient composers must be to think of a time span. This symphony is 18 minutes long. And how am I going to fill 18 minutes? What are too many ideas? What are too few ideas? And in Harris's case, he starts with a germ of a melody based on chant, or perhaps composed chant like in any case. And he builds a whole symphony out of this. He wrote many works, but the symphonies all had subtitles except for the one we're going to hear. And many reflect American scenes. The overture, When Johnny Comes Marching Home, was in 1934. Symphony number 4, a folk song symphony. Kentucky Spring. Symphony number 6, the Gettysburg Address. Symphony number 10, Abraham Lincoln Symphony. In total, he wrote 16 symphonies. He had a bit of a quirk also, which I'd like to display for you. Hang on. Thanks. In his string quartet number 3, modeled after J.S. Bach, every other movement is a prelude followed by a fugue, prelude followed by a fugue. I'm going to play just a bit of string quartet number 3 so you can hear the fugue, the second movement. like a good Bach fugue or a Vivaldi fugue. It has episodes where the subject comes in now and again, and also fillers with free counterpoint. It's a terrific quartet. We're going to listen now to parts of the Third Symphony, which is probably his best known, most performed symphony. As I mentioned, it's in a single movement, 18 minutes long, contrasting sections of very lyrical measures and then some of dramatic nature. He wrote 3 string quartets, a piano trio, piano quintet, and as we mentioned, 16 symphonies. This is the Third Symphony, written in 1938, composed in 1938. Like so many, it starts with somewhat of a chant. The cellos. There's a little comment by the upper strings. Before moving on to the next section, I should mention that Mr. Harris, also a teacher, college professor, taught at UCLA in Los Angeles, University of California, Los Angeles. Let's move on to another section here, and it's very, very rich. Full string section. Listen to the strings moving inexorably forward under the material in the woodwinds. Bustly, busy stuff. That performance by the Colorado Symphony, conducted by a person who just finished the 16th and final season with the Baltimore Symphony. That's Marin Alsop, the first woman to hold a major American, music directorship of a major American orchestra. And that was her first real big job, music director of the Colorado Symphony. We move now to Paul Creston. And I first ran across the music of Paul Creston in high school band and played much of his music in college band. And then I became a chorister and sang a lot of his music as a chorister. He was born not as Paul Creston, but as Giuseppe Guttoveggio. His parents were of Sicilian birth. And so he became an Italian-American composer, much as Bloch was a Swiss-American composer. Creston is fairly much conservative in his style, but his strong point, again, is rhythm. Like many of these American composers, the rhythm is the essence of the piece. And there's an awful lot more use of brass and of piano in the orchestra, as we found out with Aaron Copland. Again, Paul Creston was a notable teacher as well. Among the composers who studied with him were John Corigliano, Alvin Singleton, Elliott Schwartz, and Charles Roland Berry. And he taught at Central Washington State College and also at Juilliard and Mannes College. We're going to listen to a bit of his piece, Opus 33 in 1942 or 1943, when it was first performed. It's called The Chant of 1943, and it's for string orchestra. absolutely gorgeous, I think. Paul Creston was among the most performed American composers of the 40s and 50s. And he wrote a very diverse portfolio of compositions for quartets and piano solos. His saxophone concerto is a real gem, and that's difficult sometimes for me to say. I'd like to play now something that shows off the thing for which he was most famous, and that is the rhythmic content of some pieces. This is called Invocation and Dance. It was written in 1951, and we're going to hear part of the dance. Excuse me. You didn't think that was going to come, did you? I think you can hear the debt ode to jazz in this particular movement. It's a great piece. We come now to probably the most performed and most famous of these romantic, neo-romantic composers, American. I wanted, before I forget, to recommend a book to you. It's called Voices in the Wilderness, 6 American Neo-Romantic Composers by Walter Simmons. And he talks about at least 4 of the ones that we have here, plus a couple of others that you might be interested in. And you can find out more, not only about the composers, but about what neo-romanticism really is. Samuel Barber was born in Westchester, Pennsylvania in 1910. He's one of the most expressive representatives of this lyric and romantic trend in 20th century classical music, and I would further qualify that by saying American. He studied piano from an early age and soon began to compose. In 1924, he entered the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, where in addition to piano and composition, he studied voice and conducting. And you can go on YouTube and locate a link to Mr. Barber actually singing. He had a wonderful baritone voice. After graduation in 1934, he devoted himself, of course, entirely to composition. His style was distinctive and modern, but as you undoubtedly know, or many of you do at least, that it's not experimental, but it is very, very romantic. He established his reputation with his graduation thesis, much as Shostakovich did when he graduated from the St. Petersburg Conservatory with his first symphony. This is comparable for Barber, the Overture to the School for Scandal, which is loosely based on a novel, or play rather. You hear bubbly music with some mysterious kinds of undertones. And then the second theme in the oboe and taken up by the orchestra is very, very lyric and singable, as a matter of fact. Here comes the lyric part. And so on. I next want to play for you one of his vocal pieces. Barber wrote 100 songs. This is probably the most famous. It's Sure on This Shining Night, set to a poem by James A.G. Barber admired A.G. very, very much and set several of his poems. And after he set the prologue to A Death in the Family by James A.G. and called it his great piece, Knoxville, Summer of 1915, they became fast friends. For now, I'm going to play by Nathan, The Sure on the Shining Night, sung by Nathan Gunn. Kevin Murphy is the pianist.
Sure on this shining night of savage shadows.
Let me read you the text. I'm running out of time, but I think it's important that you understand how Barber sets things. Sure, on this shining night of star-made shadows round, kindness must watch for me this side the ground. On this shining night, the late year lies down the north. All is healed, all is health. High summer holds the earth, hearts all whole. Sure, on this shining night, I weep for wonder, wandering far alone of shadows on the stars.
Kindness must watch for me this side the ground.
There's a duet going on between the piano and the
The
singer.
late year lies down the north. All is healed. All is health. High summer holds the earth. Hearts all Sure, on this shining night, I weep for wonder. Wandering far alone of shadows on the
Next, we come to his violin concerto, which was commissioned by a businessman in Philadelphia for a young violin protege of his. And Barber composed in 1939, what I and many others believe are two of the most fabulous slow movements or moderato movements for the violin ever composed. Unfortunately, the violinist for whom it was written did not think that these two movements showed off his technique to any great degree. So he asked Mr. Barber to write him a third movement, which Barber did. The first movement is called Allegro. It is gorgeous. The second movement, Andante, haunting. The third movement, aptly titled Presto in moto perpetua, fast in perpetual motion. Let's listen to a bit of the first movement. Violinist is Nadia Salerno Sonnenberg. a wee bit of the last movement. And so on. Of course, the recipient of this third movement decided it was too hard to play, and so Albert Spaulding with the Philadelphia Orchestra and Eugene Ormandy did the world premiere some 2 years later in 1941. I want to go back to end this program and first of all say that I think it behooves us to do a little bit more of Samuel Barber somewhere down the road. He's such an important American composer and his music is absolutely wonderful. In 1936, he wrote a string quartet and orchestrated the Adagio under the auspices of Arturo Toscanini, who commissioned 2 works from Barber in 1938. And one was his first essay for orchestra, which is about a 12-minute piece, a big one. And the other was the orchestrated Adagio for strings, which is the most played American piece of the 20th century. And I think it's appropriate that that's probably where we'll end tonight's session. I thank you for coming. We'll just let it go, wander in and out of your kitchen or bedroom or wherever you are. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Wendy. Let me interrupt for just a second. Olin Downs, the critic at the time of the first performance, had this to say: "The simple chords create significance for the piece because, quote, that is because we have here honest music by an honest musician, not striving for precious effect or ostentatious effect, not behaving as a writer would, who, having a clear, short, popular word handy for his purpose, gets hold of a dictionary and fishes for a bigger word." Larry Ratcliffe, this is for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I'm on currently.
Yes.
Dr. Markward, thank you so much. That was amazing as always. I want to make sure people understand that next month, the lecture will be on American Composers, Part 8, the Second New England School. I also want to alert people to tomorrow's special event at the Redwood, another exceptional presentation. We have the eminent David Blight, Yale Pulitzer Prize winner of a historian, speaking on Frederick Douglass. And as many of you know, I've just returned from Europe, so I'm a bit jet lagged. You'll have to excuse me. He wrote that amazing biography of Frederick Douglass, and he is really just a dynamic speaker and one of the great minds in academia today. So I invite you to come, and it is a benefit for Stages of Freedom. And then next Wednesday, we look forward to welcoming internationally famed band leader and pianist Peter Duchin as he presents his memoir, Face the Music. Copies of his book will be available for signing. This program will be presented in person and virtually, so please visit our website for more information and to register. So with that, I want to thank Dr. Markward and all of you who have taken part this evening. And hopefully I'll see you tomorrow night, but certainly next Wednesday and of course next month with Dr. Markward again. So thank you very much and have a great night.